This speech is kind of a book report with an awful lot of opinion of me because I have some experience with the subject. The book is entitled Narkomania. It's about drug addiction in Ukraine. The author is Jennifer Carroll. She's an anthropologist. Now, I have a fair amount in common with Jennifer Carroll. I grew up with anthropologists. My mother worked with the anthropology department of the University of California in Berkeley. More than that, I went to the same liberal college, 1,000 students, that the author, Jennifer Carroll, did. Now, she graduated 20 years ago. I would have graduated 60 years ago, except it was too liberal for me and I dropped out. Like a typical anthropologist, she has fallen in love with the people she studies, and she writes a very good description of the life of the narcotics addicts here in Ukraine. So who are they? Well, drug use here is primarily a lower social class phenomenon. People mainly make their own drugs, largely, called shkira, which is made out of poppies, the same as heroin is made out of poppies. They take the poppies that you can buy that you use in cookies called mak, and you use the mak or you use the plants, and otherwise you're able to brew up an opioid in your kitchen sink that's suitable for use. It's fairly dilute, so you have to use a lot of it. So you use a big syringe, put it in your arm, and you get high. This creates a couple of problems. First of all, it's not very sanitary cooking it up in your sink. You may introduce germs that way. And secondly, these big syringes, particularly when you share them, they carry diseases from person to person. And the drug population here, just like intravenous drug users everywhere, has a lot of health problems. Hepatitis C and HIV and all sorts of diseases get passed back and forth through these syringes. The drug community here is fairly tight, and it's really several communities rolled up pretty much in one, because the same people who abuse drugs usually abuse alcohol. They tend to smoke, and they, as mentioned, often have diseases, AIDS and others, and they often have experience in prison. So it's a whole underclass phenomenon associated with drug use. In the United States, it's a little bit different. First of all, drug abuse started out when I was in college. Actually, I started smoking marijuana the first time in 1961. That was before the Beatles sang "Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds," or Bob Dylan sang "Everybody Must Get Stoned." It was very early in the game, 1961, but by 1965 or 66, everybody was doing it. And I knew those people, and I saw their lives collapse as they just dropped out, stopped working, smoked more and more, and did more and more things. And they had a whole bunch of different drugs, amphetamines, marijuana, of course, and cocaine, magic mushrooms, LSD, the peyote. They tried everything, and it resulted in a profound change in American society, and not a good one. Those people are simply not productive, and many of them died young. In fact, most of the people I knew who did that are gone. There's only one that I still know, is Ed, after whom my Eddie is named, and he had the good sense to kind of stand back and watch. So drug use in the United States was a middle class thing, and it has changed. Marijuana use is now legal in the United States, number one, and the marijuana is much stronger than it was when I smoked it 60 years ago, to the point that people who smoke marijuana today tend to get crazy. They get psychotic, schizophrenic, and they do crazy things like shoot up schools. Also, the fact that everybody's gotten used to drugs means that legal drugs, such as illegal opioids like OxyContin and antidepressants like Prozac and Zoloft, are widely accepted. And by the way, there's a very high correlation. This is self-censored so as not to run afoul of YouTube's policies. Talk about a major industry in the United States and how they influence what goes on in the topics being discussed. Recommend that you look elsewhere for uncensored input. So turning back to Ukraine, Jennifer Carroll says that the people in the drug community are fairly easily identified. I assume it's by the way they act, because they act a little bit shaky, and they probably dress funny, and they talk in their own language, and they have a whole complex of problems, including AIDS and so on. So they know who they are, and other people recognize who they are, and the other people don't want them around. They were not wanted around during the Orange Revolution, and they were not wanted on the barricades in the Revolution of Dignity. And even the DPR and the LPR, the People's Republics, didn't want the drug addicts around because they give their movement a bad name. They say, we're not a movement of drug addicts, we're idealists, we want to change things. So the drug people get no respect. Carroll writes that after the LPR and DPR took over, they shut down the methadone, the buprenorphine clinics, so these people who were trying to get off of drugs by using something safe and legal couldn't get it, and she says 1/10 of them died. They got no respect. And that's kind of the way it is in Ukraine. These people get no respect. Jennifer Carroll pleads for respect for them. I would say that the stigma serves society pretty well. The stigma is hard on the individuals who are in the drug scene, and you have to feel some compassion for them. But it's better for society that people don't want to be identified as drug addicts because it comes with a stigma. So the drug population here is only 300,000. That's a bearable load. Compare that with the 60 or 70 million drug users in the United States, and in Western Europe a comparable number, and you say Ukraine is quite well off. The stigma serves you. Let me point out an extreme example of this is Singapore. In Singapore, if you were caught selling drugs, they execute you, hang you, kill you. It's not a very liberal policy. And every year there are a couple of mothers, Australian mothers, English mommies saying, "They're killing my poor baby, and he didn't do anything except bring some marijuana into Singapore." Yes, and there are a couple of people who are executed. Too bad they're so stupid as to do this, but only a couple people, and you have to balance that against how many people are saved from dying actually of overdoses and wasting their lives with drugs and other things that are counterproductive. You'd have to say that Singapore's policy of just killing them is perhaps the most humane thing possible because it reduces the damage to society of these drugs. So why do we have these drugs?
This segment is likewise self-censored in order not to run afoul of YouTube's policies on misinformation, period. I will not characterize what I have to say as misinformation, but YouTube thinks so, and therefore it is blocked out of this presentation. It's available on my website. You can read this book review on the website and get the full opinion, and there's another video presentation that is not censored elsewhere on the web.
At any rate, I recommend this book, Narkomania by Jennifer Carroll. Last I looked, it was free on Amazon. Zero charge, that's rare for a book on Amazon. And it tells you a lot about the history of the Orange Revolution, the Revolution of Dignity, and the war in 2014. It tells you a lot about the narcotics situation here in Ukraine. But it also tells you that you should have sympathy for these people. And my personal view, from having lived with drugs for 60 years now as an American, is that that sympathy is misplaced. They don't deserve your sympathy. They should not, drugs should simply not be legal. There's no good in them. Madam Toastmaster.